Hi, guys. Your favorite pseudo intellectual here, Lord Hellespont V. Welcome to the channel. I just wanted to share my off the cuff impressions from Watches and Wonders 2022 and the new releases by Rolex, Tudor, and others. I'll start with Tudor and what to me is the most interesting model among their novelties, the Black Bay Pro, their new GMT watch. I think you wouldn't be surprised that my interest in this model stems from my fascination with the original Explorer 2, that famous spelunking watch that was introduced by Rolex in 1971 and produced until 1984 in this particular iteration, the 1655, that is interchangeably called Freccione, which is the Italian name that the collectors gave to it, owing to its very unique arrow-like GMT / 24-hour hand. It is also called Steve McQueen. Make no mistake, this is not one of the Rolex watches that was actually worn by the King of Cool, by the famous actor. But since Steve McQueen was a huge icon of style and perhaps also a maverick at the time of this particular watch's introduction, somehow the coolness rubbed off on this watch as well, which came to be known after him with his name. Even then, I think it was a pretty unique watch, an oddball in the Rolex sports range. And it was made at the time for cave explorers, for spelunking. And the idea was for those kinds of people, for those professionals who spend so much time in that dark, cavernous environment, it would be difficult to tell night from day, and that a 24-hour hand would prove quite helpful. I particularly chose an example, or rather two photographs of an example that will help us perhaps in identifying some of the design cues and some of the nods that Tudor's Black Bay Pro gives to this 1655, the original Explorer 2. And we'll move from there to some of the specs of the modern watch, of Tudor's contemporary interpretation and execution of this peculiar GMT watch in the Rolex history. I've mentioned before that one of the nicknames for this watch, Freccione, comes from the arrow-shaped hand, which, as you see in this particular example from, I think, year 1972, has aged into an orangish yellow color, not too far from what we see in the Black Bay Pro, in the Tudor Black Bay Pro. If you actually examine the catalogs from that initial period with Rolex, these hands were executed in crimson red. Nowadays, you can find the examples of this watch in very rich orange colors on the GMT hand. Something like this, which is really a yellow with a slight tint of orange, and all the way to a white, in fact. And those examples are usually called and presented as albino. And I wanted to also choose this particular shot for you to see the acrylic domed crystal and the unique aesthetic that it gives to this watch. Of course, We are already in the 70s, so the Oyster Bracelet that you would find in these watches is the folded link without the rivets. Um, Nevertheless, Tudor decided to preserve their particular aesthetic, which gives their watches that unique riveting look with those faux rivets attached to the sides of the bracelet. Now, I know some people really have an issue with them. I don't have any strong feelings. I have other sorts of qualms with the Tudor range, which I actually overall really like and appreciate. And I think it's just an incredible thing for Rolex to have this particular subsidiary that has its unique place and autonomy in the market, and that freely taps into the heritage of the crown in a way that Rolex usually shies away from, specifically because of their um, own identity of always somehow moving forward, always advocating utility and progress, somehow technological innovation, rather than pure aesthetic clinging to a past. Even though, of course, Rolex should always be given credit for having preserved the identity of their most recognizable models to the extent that you can hold up a watch from the 60s next to something from this current year and somehow still recognize the family resemblance in a very strong and emphatic fashion. So here we have Tudor's interpretation of this watch, which of course comes in a 39 millimeter case, which is more loyal to the vintage inspiration of the watch. Of course, they have their own design language that they chose to still preserve. So no crown guards, and a relatively bigger crown. Um, we have preserved again the riveted oyster bracelet with the false rivets on the sides. And of course, it has Tudor's chronograph movement that gives a particular thickness to the watch that is, of course, just a little bit different from uh, Rolex Explorer 2 1655. Now, again, I think that's a unique aspect of the watch, of the Tudor. I would not necessarily hold it against them because a lot of people who like to wear a contemporary tool watch want that sort of heft, want that sort of presence on their wrist, and actually enjoy the feel of the watch. So more power to Tudor for preserving that, for sticking to their guns. I would like to at some point see a model in their lineup that is a little slimmer, um, and that executes those case dimensions of a vintage watch a little more faithfully, but that's just me. Um, we have a domed sapphire crystal, right, as you can see from the contours here, from the edges, as it contrasts or as it blends into the brushed satin steel bezel, which has those fonts that recall what was on the 1655. The 24-hour hand, the GMT hand, having, of course, preserved the snowflake signature, is actually executed in a very similar shade of yellow. maybe a little less orange. The depth rating echoes that yellow, maybe in a slightly different shade, which I think is a very nice detail. The loom has that faux patina look that some, again, nitpick uh, about, but I don't see much to disagree with. I think again, it's implemented really beautifully and subtly. And the watch comes in three different um, versions, right? It comes on the Oyster steel bracelet, and in that way, the watch lists for about 4,000 US dollars. And you also have the option of a canvas strap, which has that line of yellow that I think fits really well with the aesthetics of the watch, and with that, with different shades of yellow, just contrasting with the rest of the dial. And I think playing along really well, actually, with the color of the loom. And then you have the hybrid um, rubber leather band, which again, I think is a very tasteful choice for this particular watch. Um, and once again, I'm just really impressed by the fact that Tudor decided to pay homage to this relatively um, rare and very unique moment in Rolex's catalog, in Rolex's heritage. And I'm quite taken by the fact, once again, that they managed to put uh, what is, quite the connoisseur's topic, and what is a really niche interest in the vintage market, um, in the middle of the conversation about new releases, right? And that's why I really appreciate Tudor, because they have been really successful so far in inspiring and sparking an interest for vintage watches, and at least for vintage aesthetics, among a much younger crowd, among new generations of collectors. Of course, another aspect of the watch that harkens to those aesthetics of the days of yore is um, the naked appearance of the loom plots, right? They have no surrounds whatsoever, which I think, again, ends up being a very unique and tasteful aspect of Tudor's interpretation of this Explorer 2, right? You have something that speaks to the history of Rolex. Uh, you have something that picks up design clues and certain um, passion and attention to detail to a new generation without merely producing a vintage copy. Guys, thank you for being with me in this live. I recognize a lot of the familiar faces. Love you all. Thanks for being with me on this presentation. If you want to encourage me in creating new and original content, please consider making a donation to lordhellespontv@gmail.com. And if you have any questions, and if you want to reach out to me in any other way, you can use that email address and I will respond to you very promptly. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. And I thank you for supporting me from day one. Please, if you enjoy the content, like and subscribe, and tell all your friends so I can reach my first major goal on YouTube, which is 1,000 subscribers. Thank you all.